July 25, 1944, 9:38 in the morning. The sky over Saint-Lô, France, turns black, not from clouds, from aircraft. Nearly 2,000 American bombers are approaching in waves so dense they block out the sun. On the ground, German soldiers look up. They have been bombed before. Every soldier on the Western Front has been bombed. But something about this feels different. The formation is too massive. The approach is too deliberate. And then the first bombs begin to fall. What happens next will kill more German soldiers in a few hours than most battles claim in a week. And the weapon that does the killing is something the Germans have never encountered at this scale. Something that will transform modern warfare and remain in use to this day. The Americans called it carpet bombing with a special twist. The Germans would come to call it something else entirely. The invisible rain of death. But here is what the history books often miss. This was not just about dropping a lot of bombs. This was about a specific weapon, delivered in a specific way, that exploited a vulnerability no one fully understood until thousands of men had already died. To understand what happened at Saint-Lô, you first have to understand the nightmare that was Normandy in July 1944. The D-Day landings had succeeded. Allied forces were ashore. The invasion had worked. But then, everything stalled. The bocage country of Normandy was a defender's paradise. Thick hedgerows, some of them centuries old, divided every field into a natural fortress. Sunken lanes became killing zones. Every 100 yards of advance cost casualties. American forces were taking horrific losses for minimal gains. The breakout that was supposed to liberate France had turned into a grinding war of attrition. German defenders, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, were holding thanks to the terrain. General Omar Bradley knew that conventional tactics would not work. Attacking through the hedgerows was too costly. The Germans were too well dug in, and what he needed was something that would shatter their defensive positions so completely that his forces could pour through before the enemy recovered. The solution was Operation Cobra, and at its heart was a weapon that would define the operation's success. That weapon was the fragmentation bomb combined with high-explosive bombs delivered through saturation bombing. But there was a specific variant that proved especially devastating. The 260-pound fragmentation cluster bomb, which scattered smaller bomblets across a wide area, and the newly refined 100-pound general-purpose bomb with the instantaneous fuse. Let me explain why this combination was so lethal. Traditional bombs were designed to destroy structures, vehicles, and fortifications. They would penetrate the ground before exploding, creating craters but limiting their antipersonnel effect. The instantaneous fuse changed everything. These bombs detonated the moment they touched any surface, including the ground, treetops, or hedgerows. The explosion spread horizontally rather than vertically. When thousands of these bombs fell across a concentrated area simultaneously, they created what bombardiers described as a steel rain. Fragments traveling at thousands of feet per second swept across the landscape at chest and head height. Foxholes provided little protection. Trenches were death traps. Any soldier caught in the open simply ceased to exist. The Germans had experienced air attacks before. They knew how to survive conventional bombing. Dig deep, wait it out, emerge and fight. But the instantaneous fuse bombs did not allow for this. They did not give you a crater to hide in. They did not telegraph where death would come from. They turned the air itself into a weapon. On July 25th, the first wave of 350 heavy bombers struck the German positions near Saint-Lô. They dropped over 1,000 tons of bombs in less than an hour. Then came the medium bombers. Then the fighter bombers. Wave after wave, for hours, concentrating their payload on a rectangular area just 3 miles wide and 1 mile deep. Inside that rectangle were the Panzer Lehr division and supporting units. Some of Germany's best troops. Veterans who had fought on multiple fronts. Men who had survived years of combat. Most of them did not survive the next few hours. General Fritz Bayerlein commanded Panzer Lehr. He was a veteran of the Afrika Korps, Rommel's chief of staff. He had seen everything the war had to offer. After the bombing ended, he tried to describe what had happened to his division. His report to higher command was bleak. 3 battalion command posts had been wiped out. Company positions had simply disappeared. His communications were destroyed. His reserves were buried. At least 70% of his men were dead, wounded, or in shock so severe they could not function. But here is the number that truly captures what happened. Panzer Lehr had approximately 5,000 men in the target zone. After the bombing, fewer than a dozen tanks were operational. Bayerlein described his division as annihilated. Not defeated, not retreating, annihilated. And Panzer Lehr was not alone. Across the American sector, German units reported similar devastation. The 353rd Infantry Division lost half its strength. The 275th Infantry Division reported that many of its positions simply no longer existed. Men who had been manning defensive lines were gone as if they had never been there. The total German casualties during Operation Cobra's opening bombardment and the 8 days of fighting that followed exceeded 20,000, killed, wounded, and captured. Many of those deaths came not from ground combat but from the air campaign that preceded it. The Germans had a term for this kind of attack. They called it Bombenteppich, the bomb carpet. But what they experienced at St. Lo was something beyond what they had anticipated. The density, the fusing, the combination of fragmentation and high explosive weapons created effects they had never trained to survive. Here is what made this so devastating from a tactical perspective. German defensive doctrine relied on positions in depth, multiple lines of resistance, with reserves positioned to counterattack any breakthrough. The forward positions would absorb the initial assault, buy time, and allow the reserves to identify and seal any penetration. The carpet bombing at St. Lo eliminated this doctrine entirely. There were no forward positions to absorb anything. There were no reserves to counterattack. The entire defensive zone had been processed through what soldiers grimly called the meat grinder. When American ground forces finally advanced, they found not an enemy army, but the remnants of one. One American infantryman who entered the bombed zone described it as walking through a moonscape. Craters everywhere, but stranger than craters. The hedgerows were shredded. Equipment was twisted and scattered. And the bodies, not whole bodies, mostly, just pieces, fragments of men mixed with fragments of steel. But the story is not entirely one-sided. And this is where the history gets complicated. The same weapon that devastated the Germans also killed Americans. On July 24th, the day before the main attack, a preliminary bombing run went wrong. Winds shifted. Smoke obscured markers. Bombs fell short. 25 American soldiers died, and 131 were wounded. General Leslie McNair, one of the highest-ranking American officers killed in World War II, died on July 25th when bombs landed on his observation position. Over 100 American soldiers were killed by their own Air Force during Operation Cobra's opening. This was the price of the weapon's indiscriminate nature. It could not distinguish friend from enemy. It simply destroyed everything within its impact zone. The same characteristics that made it devastating to the Germans made it dangerous to any soldier, regardless of uniform. Some commanders questioned whether the casualties were worth it, but the results spoke for themselves. On July 26th, American forces began advancing through the shattered German lines. They encountered almost no organized resistance. Units that should have been defending key terrain were simply gone. The breakthrough that had seemed impossible just days before was happening. Within a week, American forces had advanced over 30 miles. By August 1st, Patton's Third Army was operational and racing across France. The stalemate in Normandy was over. The liberation of Western Europe had truly begun. And it had begun because a weapon rendered thousands of men unable to resist. The lessons of St. Lo would shape air power doctrine for generations. The concentrated application of massive air bombardment against enemy ground forces became a standard opening move for major offensives. Korea saw it. Vietnam saw it. The Gulf War perfected it with precision-guided munitions that achieved the same effects with far fewer bombs. But there is a darker lesson too. The bombing at Saint-Lô worked because of concentration. Nearly 5,000 tons of bombs fell on an area smaller than a few city blocks. The density of destruction was so complete that survival within the target zone was largely a matter of chance. This was not surgical. This was industrial killing applied to warfare. The Germans who survived described feelings of total helplessness. They could do nothing. Their training meant nothing. Their courage meant nothing. They could only lie in their holes and hope that randomness would spare them while it killed the man next to them. This psychological effect was perhaps as important as the physical destruction. Units that survived the bombing were often too traumatized to fight effectively. Men who had faced Russian human wave attacks without flinching broke down after experiencing the bomb carpet. There was something uniquely demoralizing about death from the sky that gave no chance to fight back. After the war, German generals were extensively interviewed about their experiences. Almost universally, they identified Allied air superiority as the decisive factor in the Western campaign. Not just air superiority in the traditional sense of controlling the skies, but the ability to deliver overwhelming firepower to specific points on the ground. Field Marshal von Rundstedt called it the single greatest advantage the Allies possessed. General Bayerlein, who had rebuilt Panzer Lehr only to see it destroyed again in the Falaise pocket, stated that no ground force could withstand that kind of bombardment, no matter how brave or well-trained. The invisible rain had fundamentally changed what was possible in warfare. Here is what fascinates me about this history. We often focus on the weapons themselves, the bombs, the planes, the tonnage, but what really made Operation Cobra successful was the integration, the coordination between air and ground forces, the timing, the selection of the target, the understanding of enemy defensive doctrine, and how to nullify it. The weapon was devastating, yes, but it was the application of that weapon at the right place, at the right time, in the right way that turned a stalemate into a rout. The Germans had bombs too. They had aircraft, but they never achieved this kind of operational effect because they never developed the doctrine to use air power this way. So here is my question for you. The carpet bombing at Saint-Lô was incredibly effective, but it also killed American soldiers and obliterated an area so completely that it shocked even the victors. Do you think this kind of mass bombardment was justified by the results? Or does the indiscriminate nature of the weapon cross a line that precision should have prevented? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this changed how you understand the air war in World War II, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals the weapons and tactics that decided famous battles. Thanks for watching.